The first is about surveillance, enforcement, and capital markets infrastructure. I am pleased to give the floor now to Mr. Abdelhakim Barra, Chairman Algerian Securities Authority, who will moderate this session. Please welcome him and his panel speakers to the stage. Mr. Cecile O'Brien Owens, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Total Technologies and Solutions. Mr. Sandeep Srivastava, Partner Financial Services Authority, Ernst & Young Middle East. Mr. Giacomo Toselli, Head of Compliance and Surveillance, SIA, and Mr. Hafid Obrik, Financial Sector Specialist, Arab Monetary Fund.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to moderate this panel. The theme of our session is surveillance, enforcement, and capital market infrastructure. The discussion will be about the technical challenge as well to effective market surveillance issues and the regulatory tools. The environment is increasingly automated and sophisticated. The challenge of market surveillance, the appropriate technology regarding the level of sophistication of financial trading patterns across different products, cross-market and cross-border. We will as well have a glance at the principles of financial market infrastructure according to IOSCO and how we deal with the threat of cybercrime and to what extent the coverage is sufficient. As said before, the innovation and sophistication have led to complex financial instruments, fully automated electronic trading, and the introduction of direct market access will as well induce a change of the way the markets are regulated to preserve their integrity. Regulators should keep the pace with the developing trends and be anticipative to prevent any market transgression. So it's highly important to review from time to time the tools, mechanisms, personnel, and processes relied upon. And to discuss and to deal with the subject, let me introduce our distinguished speakers. So we'll have Hafid Obrik, Senior Financial Sector Specialist from the Arab Monetary Fund. Mr. Giacomo Toselli, Head of the Compliance and Surveillance of SIA. SIA focus in compliance in financial markets. And we have as well, we welcome Sandeep Srivastava, who is partnered with Financial Services Advisory Practice of Ernst & Young, based in Dubai. His areas of excellency are risk management, regulatory transformation, capital market, and treasury. We welcome as well Cecile O'Brien Owens, who is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Total Technologies and Solutions. His company has many success, like the business processes, innovation in financial markets. So let's start with the question, and we will start with Sandeep. My first question, IOSCO principles are fairly comprehensive in the coverage. What are the areas of financial markets infrastructure that require focus from the perspective of MENA region capital markets?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now, before I, straight away jump into IOSCO principles, there are a few things that I would like to impress upon. One of the very, very important aspects that we have seen in different markets across the world is ensuring the safety of investors, ensuring that you have adequate infrastructure available in the financial markets around ensuring that surveillance activities, monitoring remedial actions can be carried out in time. And this is where what we see is the role played by principles like IOSCO. So essentially, what we see here is that IOSCO principles were defined in terms of ensuring that the key market participants, whether it is the central clearing house, or it is a depository, or it is the payment institution, or the trade repository, those key elements of our robust financial markets are in place. And the key objective, Mr. Chairman, is around strengthening the core financial market infrastructure to ensure that real-time monitoring, efficient settlement, exchange of securities, exchange of cash is taken place in an efficient manner. So one thing that I would like to impress upon here is that these IOSCO's principles should not be looked at more in terms of a regulatory requirement. More than a regulatory requirement, it has some regulatory issues, so I would not deny that. And certainly, regulators are enforcing and would be enforcing it as we go further. But more important than that for me is ensuring how efficiently you can carry out the core functions of your financial market, be it settlements, be it payment processing, be it depository institution function, be it surveillance activity, be it enforcement, be it carrying out the remedial activity. So I think that's an important point that I would like to impress upon. Now, having said this, there are a number of areas which are covered as part of these principles. Some areas, as I mentioned to you, are more regulatory in nature. Some areas are more relating to governance. So for instance, in case if you have a market disruption, how are you going to ensure that it is restored, the normal market functioning is restored in an orderly fashion? There are areas which are covered purely from a risk perspective. So for instance, if there are clearing members who have defaulted, if there is a liquidity crisis in the market, if there are some technical snags that have taken place in the infrastructure, how do you go about managing these risks in an effective manner without disrupting the market? More than that, what you also see is that in the current environment, what has become very, very important for financial markets in particular, although banking system is another example where it is important, is ensuring that there is adequate reporting and disclosures. Because if I look at today, as a counterparty, I enter into an OTC derivative contract with my European counterparts. What I see is that there are requirements which are relating to EMIR in Europe. If I am entering into similar transactions with my counterparts in US, for example, now there are some requirements which have come from a Dodd-Frank perspective. So the point that I want to bring forth is that having this IOSCO's principles implemented adequately in the market would ensure that integration is smoother when it comes to the international market. And as all of us are aware that some of the latest developments, whether we see in Saudi or UAE or in, for example, Qatar, we are finding that more and more integration is taking place with the international world. Now, the last point that I would like to come to here is, let's be very clear. When we look at this region, there are some regional specific characteristics that we need to take in view. At this point in time, if you look at the variety of capital market products that we have in the market, I would say that we do not have very complex capital market products. So from that perspective, what I find is that our priorities should be more in terms of ensuring that our simple, plain vanilla, basic capital market products are handled first from an infrastructure perspective. So for instance, if I need to prioritize some of these activities, I would say that, I would look at IPOs. as the first point in terms of ensuring that these principles are implemented. I would take OTC derivatives as the last one, because from a region perspective, our priorities at this point in time are slightly different. The next thing that I would like to also mention is that when we talk about all these principles, the objective here is not to just take them and implement them irrespective of the applicability. I would think that at this point in time, there are some very positive points which are in favor of this region. One is, unlike many countries in the Western world, we are not having the legacy infrastructure. So, our infrastructure here in the region is fairly new. So, upgrading that infrastructure becomes less challenging. However, what we need to do is, when we implement it, what we should ensure is that market players' interest is kept at the top. So, by which what I mean is that there are some commercial considerations of enforcement, of surveillance that we need to take in view. And last but not the least is, what we need to look at is that when we are developing this infrastructure here in the region, let us work around through the forums like this in ensuring that there is adequate integration, exchange of information, disclosures, reporting taking place within the participants of Arab world. If that integration takes place very well, you would see that things will take off in a very fast and efficient manner.
Thank you, Sandeep. So we'll continue on that same subject. So can you tell us, if, when you are based on some of the lessons learned from more advanced markets and your experience, what are the key priorities that should be set for development of Arab financial markets?
Yeah, sure. So I would think, given my interaction in some of the countries where I have very closely interacted with the capital market regulator and exchanges like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, I think at this point in time, upgradation of payment system seems to be the first priority. And obviously, when I talk about upgradation of payment system, here this is not an issue which is within the domain of capital market. There is a large amount of influence that comes from a banking system, and central banks need to gear up. So I think at this point in time, what I see in the market, having interacted with the central bankers and capital market regulator, payment systems is one that is coming up high on the agenda. The second thing that is very high on the agenda, as I see, is spreading the knowledge, spreading the know-how, spreading information in the market, so that people, they are able to make use of the existing infrastructure in an efficient manner. All other aspects relating to central counterparty, OTC derivative, all those aspects, I think they are lower in the priority. Payment system and spreading the knowledge and information in the market, these are the two high priority items with regard to financial market infrastructure.
Thanks a lot, Sandeep. Going to Hafid. Hafid, who is from Arab Monetary Fund. My question is, what's the future of infrastructure to better integrate Arab capital markets? It's the same. And then I'll ask you, in the meantime, what are the risks associated with that question?
Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I totally agree with what Sandeep was saying, and indeed, it's one of the important topics, let's say, in the region, is to how to implement the new PFMIs, the new principle for financial market infrastructure. I think we have to go back, a few years back, to say that we got two sets of principles, one for payment system, second one are from IOSCO, published and issued by IOSCO, and the frontier was somehow unclear between the two of them, and they were even treated separately. Now, with the new principles, we cannot even dissociate between them, and that's the reason why the new principles are becoming somehow a challenge, let's say, for all the region, especially, let's say, in our region. I want to highlight 2 points exactly in this regard. One is the disclosure. If you want to enforce or to strengthen the trust of the investors, everything has to be published. The disclosure is a must, and I think it's one of the responsibilities, responsibility C, if I remember it well, of the authorities in terms of the new principle framework. Second one is in terms of definitely of infrastructure, but one piece of the one component of the infrastructure is really an issue here is the CSD, the Central Securities Depository. In the principle, they have even dedicated one full principle 11, about CSD, about trade repository systems, but CSD is a key factor, let's say, if you want to have a performant, efficient, secure capital markets running. I totally agree as well with Sandeep when he's mentioning that payment system is in the top of the agendas of the authorities, yes. And I think a lot has been done in the region. We have seen, I'm talking about the settlement of the cash leg transaction related to any securities transaction, any securities settlement. There is a cash leg that has been done, and I think many countries in the region have set up there what we call the RTGS, the real-term gross settlement system, to effectively to bring more effectiveness and performance to the system, to the payment system, but as well to include, let's say, all the settlement of the cash leg part, let's say, of the security settlement. This is a key issue. Even having said that, I think that there is still in some countries the link maybe is not still not as a settlement balances are not being included or loaded in the RTGS on a timely manner, and this is an effort that has been done, that has to be done by the authorities. This is one thing. I want also to touch base about another dimension. Have you mentioned it, Mr. Chairman, about how to better integrate the Arab capital markets? In this regard, and I think the chairman of the AMF mentioned it yesterday, that there is a project going on how to have a regional payment system among the Arab countries. What we have in mind is, this is maybe one of the wishing, aspects on the list, but it's a very important. If one day we succeed to put it in place, it's going to be a tremendous, let's say, change. It will bring tremendous change to the region. The project consists of implementing a system that will settle all the transaction cross-border between the Arab countries, all type of payments, including, of course, the payment, the cash leg of the securities transaction. This will definitely bring some more dynamic, let's say, to how securities are being settled in the region. This will definitely offer a room for better integration between all the Arab capital markets in the region. And this will, let's say, if we have another layer where it can control any risk, it can mitigate the risk, this is an additional, let's say, security, aspect that will be added, let's say, to the whole, to the whole system. Where we are in this project, we have done a feasibility study. The project is being done or conducted under the umbrella of the Arab Central Bank governors. And the study shows effectively that there is a business case. There is a business case in the region. I can announce, for example, 2 key figures. One is to say that in 2013, we got around 5.2 million transaction cross-border. I'm not talking about domestic transaction, I'm talking about cross-border transaction. 5.2 million transaction, with 95% of these 5.2 million transaction for customer payments. Interbank payment represents only 5%. Of course, all of you will agree with me that in terms of value, it's going to be the opposite. Almost 77% of the value represent interbank payment, but still 22% for customer payment. and the total value represents around 2.3 trillion US dollar. This is a very huge amount. Okay, it includes all type of payments, including if which is part of it, the securities settlement cross-border that happen, let's say, among few countries, especially the GCC. Our hope is that if this project can, let's say, can see the light in the coming 1 or 2 years, that will be, I would say, a very huge step, let's say, towards having a better integration among the Arab capital markets. This is it.
Okay, thanks a lot. That's a lot. Now we'll be talking about electronic challenges as well. And my question are to Giacomo. How much is important for electronic trading surveillance solution dedicated to capital market authorities to identify anomalies in the trading life cycle? Giacomo?
Thank you very much. I think that spotting anomalies in the trading life cycle is the first and minimum requirement that capital market authorities should fulfill in trading surveillance. Identifying market manipulations is an activity that can be also delegated in some cases to stock exchanges surveillance departments. I said minimum requirement because financial markets are now a complex, interconnected market of markets. We see multi-listed instruments, OTC trading derivatives, and more, this kind of trading are more common and common. And so focusing only on the trading life cycle on a single market, on a single instrument is no more enough. Capital market authorities should try to put all the pieces of the puzzle together and to see what is going on in a wider picture. To do so, it's important to perform the analysis of market manipulation and market abuses at investor level. So capital market authorities should also try to consider all the possible trading venues that are available in a specific country. Even if it's also important now to, if a capital market authority wants to be really effective, also not to limit the analysis to its country, but also to open it to other countries, to open it to other markets that are listing the same instruments. And this issue, anyway, raises an important issue. If these final investor information are available in the trading surveillance system of regulators. In many countries, we have seen that capital market authorities don't have the possibility to link the transaction to their final beneficiaries, and collecting this information is very, very tough for them. In Europe, for example, we have seen that few regulators can have this kind of information, like Spain and UK, while other regulators are forced to monitor anonymous transactions, omnibus accounts. They cannot go deeper in this kind of details. And due to this reason, the European Commission, for instance, has put in the MiFIR, the new market in financial instrument regulation, which will be going live in 2017, the obligation for financial institutions to report all the executed transactions done by their customer with the details of the final client. Having this kind of information during the analysis can help regulators in identify multi-market strategies. So a single investor which is active in the same moment in more than one market can help in identify multi-instrument strategies. Having in a single screen, anyway, in a single picture, the equity trading, the derivative trading, the OTC trading, the lending, the borrowing, all what a single investor is doing on a specific instrument, a specific set of instruments, can help the regulator understanding the real strategy for the investor. And we have seen also that more and more often investors are acting in organized groups. We have seen that investor-based analysis can help in identify or can leverage on the multi-investor behaviors. For instance, strategies that are put in place by trading rings or by more than one investor acting in the same direction. For instance, in order to conceal the ownership of a single security. So the investor-based analysis can also exploit links between insiders and their companies. So we can specifically monitor what an insider is doing on the instrument that is of the issuer to which is related. So it's not only important to concentrate on the spotting trading anomalies, but it's also important to open the analysis to different aspects in the trading.
Okay, thank you, Giacomo. And the final investor, during the abuse analysis of the authorities, the regulator, how can the feedback be used, and could it be a facilitation in understanding the abusive behavior?
Yes, as already mentioned, identifying which is behind the transaction can help in identifying links, can help also in exploiting new technologies. Now we're talking about also to include social media, to include Twitter, to include the use of different technologies in moving ideas, in moving different kind of information. And so this kind of having the final investor using the final investor information can also open the analysis to new landscapes, and so you can also exploit what the technology can put on the table of the analysis. So I think that it's really important to be able to link this information.
Thank you, Giacomo. Going back now to integration of Arab capital markets, my question is for Cecile. Are Arab countries ready for participation in cross-border IPOs? And how can the capital market authorities in the Arab region help with these cross-border, cross-market IPOs?
Okay, thank you. I look back when I was a little boy, my mother used to tell me every day, "You are my favorite, I love you very much." It was 20 years later when I discovered that she told the same thing to my 9 brothers and sisters. This is to say that the capital market authorities, by your existence, have established a precedent of protecting the investor. You haven't done it all, but just because you're here today shows that you care. And I think the protection of the investor is what should be high on your list. But going along this process of protecting the investor, you've also got to shore up your individual domains. And by that, I mean you have to automate the processes so that you make it easier for the investors to invest, and you give confidence to the investors that the investment process is going as smoothly as possible. There are some rules and regulations that I feel each of you could implement in your own countries that would improve the overall process of buying shares from an investor. Take yesterday, Ahmed Al-Marhoun spoke about, he shows up every year in a session on integration, and they talk about what we should do, but never what we did. This morning, I'm going to talk about accomplishments that have happened, mostly in the primary market. And these accomplishments are to the extent where exchanges have been found to actually playing well with the banks and with the brokers and other offer participants. I speak particularly about IPOs. because I believe if you can't collect quality data and control the process as a regulator, then you end up with garbage at the end of the day or the end of the offer period. Not being able to give accurate information at the beginning of a rights issue, or give a share book that contains accurate information for proxy mailings and stuff like that, really puts a blight on the institution as a whole. If we can't control the quality of our data, then we can't control the quality of what we're monitoring, what we're managing, and becomes a big problem. There's one glaring omission in all the rules and regulations that are made up by the various authorities here. You put rules and regulations out there to manage everything up until the day of an IPO, and then you skip over here to when the company becomes listed, and then you start managing those processes again with rules and regulations. No one, with the exception of Oman, has published any rules and regulations that control the participants of the subscription collection process, i.e. the banks, the brokers, however the subscriptions finally make its way to the exchanges. Oman has issued executive regulations that actually explains who can participate, who the lead manager is, what his qualifications are, how many selecting or collecting or receiving entities they have to get to participate in the process, certain things about public websites and all the rest of it. These things have to be listed. I know UAE is in the process of putting out regulations like this, but you have to emphasize the control that you have over the process. And what you need to do is take the subscription process back from the banks who have controlled it or owned this process historically. You need to allow your exchanges to own the process, own the data format specifications, and control the overall processes. I've got a few things that I want to I call milestones, which actually started back in 2004, and I'll speak about that in a minute, but we had to get here somehow. It's a significant emotional event when an IPO can be run in the UAE and the close brings refunds within 24 hours and the actual company, i.e. Emaar, was listed in 48 hours. Now, this is a historic first, yes. Okay. This is a historic first, but it's not the first time that you've had these automatic processes take place. I remember the Al Marai IPO in Saudi Arabia was ready to list 35 minutes after the close, and this was due to the automation of the offer process steps. This was due with the banks working together and being able to give the exchange a file that it could accept without covering its eyes. Who benefits from the automation process? You have the investors, you have the issuer, you have the banks who actually will cooperate. Do I get this? Where did I get this information from? The new publication, I took the liberty of taking USA's name this morning and published it first thing this morning, and it gives you all this information on the automation process by DFM, where they automated the entire process. This is to help your exchanges see how they can generate revenue. We're going to take back some of the processes that the banks have historically controlled. The idea is to bring the processing up from the banks to the exchanges regulated by the capital market authorities. One thing I want to point out here, you get complaints from the banks, we can't do this, we can't do that. In 7 days, Emirates MBD automated 500 ATM machines to accept subscriptions electronically. Over half of their subscribers submitted through the use of ATMs. That's a significant emotional event. We first started doing that, it was first done in Saudi back in 2004, but it's now being done here. In countries like Singapore, you can't buy shares unless you buy through an ATM. You have to put out rules and regulations and allow processes to flow where you are in control of the offer process steps and the format of the data. I also published another newspaper this morning called The Future of the Arab Exchange, and this newspaper asks a question or makes a statement. Arab exchanges embrace change. 4 key subject areas: automation, integration, cross-border, and playing well. We're talking about integration of the primary markets, not the secondary markets. Playing well together. When my mother told me she loved me the best, I was able to go out and play with others. Here, you have to play with other exchanges, other banks, and other regions in order to facilitate proper cross-border communication. Basically, we're going to talk briefly about what cross-border participation is. There's an interim solution, which partially is being used now in some of the IPOs, and there's a strategic solution that should be adopted by everyone. 10 years ago, the internet was not what it is now, especially in the GCC region. A lead manager would start out with an IPO, and in a particular Arab country, that lead manager was a bank, and he went out and bought microwave systems and installed them hardwired on the roof of each one of the collecting or receiving banks. The next lead manager took the lead and did the same thing, went out and bought microwave systems and installed it on top of the receiving banks. These banks sent FTP files, spreadsheets, text files to the lead manager, and the lead manager aggregated this information, did some validations, dumped the data in a bucket, and carried that bucket over to the exchange and dumped it on the desk of the head of IT, who had to manage that data. Essentially, you ended up with configurations that look similar to this. We have 3 different Arab countries using a lead manager or a lead receiving bank model or what have you. But for all intents and purposes, the receiving banks are connecting to their local lead manager. Each receiving bank has to manage multiple connectivity. We have special arrangements have to be made for participation in each of a cross-border IPO. These things have actually taken place. I have known of IPOs here in the UAE that have used participants from other countries. But there's no business rules, no processing rules, or anything else to control this. So, we had all those microwave dishes on top of the banks. Naturally, they ran out of room. In this particular country, there were 8 lead managers. Each one of them was a different bank for the first 8 IPOs. And they connected to 12 different banks. They said, okay, forget the microwave dish, let's use lease lines. And you ended up with 8 times 12 or 96 lease lines, which did not work. Okay, bring in the hub. The hub is internet service provider. A lot of hubs are being used now in today's technology to minimize connectivity. We actually have receiving banks that connected to a hub at the local ISP, still uploading FTP files and what have you, and a lead manager would pick up that information and collate it, aggregate it, take it to the exchange. We also started talking electronically in real time to verification centers, such as the Emirates ID Center, that wasn't available at that time, but other ID verification centers, including the exchanges themselves, to verify the information. If there was another lead manager, just switch roles, but the same configuration existed. We ended up having, I'm using 3 of the GCC countries that I'm familiar with that have automated processes to some extent for each level of this. I know Egypt has done a lot lately in automation, but I'm not familiar with the processes, so I won't discuss it at this point. But hubs were used for connectivity purposes only. With UAE, you had the lead receiving bank model, where everybody gave data to lead receiving bank, and lead receiving bank gives this data to the exchange on behalf of the lead manager. Over in Qatar, you had a lead manager, all the receiving banks, same model we discussed. Over in Saudi, you had a private vendor who provided an intelligent subscription, fully automated processing and stuff like that ahead of its time. It's about 6 or 7 years ago. The Intelligent Hub will allow exchange-hosted IPO management. If you can imagine that all of this stuff had been done with the banks or the lead manager, move that processing up to the exchange level, let all processes take place there, let the exchange control those processes, and let the Capital Markets Authority manage them or create the rules and regulations. You end up with something that looks like this, where you have a hub configuration, and hubs can speak to hubs, and you can have individual connectivity from receiving banks in other countries. What you want to end up with are business rules. Right now, UAE is ready to participate in this. Saudi is ready to participate in this. Oman is this close, and so is Qatar. I have to check with the others. But when I say participate, that means elevate the processing, take it away from the banks, put the processing in the exchange, and start charging for these services. Okay, Capital Market Authority owns the rules and regulations. Exchanges own the subscription and the data format specifications, but the banks have been taking all of the money. You change that by moving all the processing up to the banks, up to the exchanges. They're doing everything automatically, electronically, in real time that the banks were doing. So you end up with something that looks like this, where I have Tadawul talking to one of the exchanges in UAE. These communications can be automated. So for all intents and purposes, we could have a country like Lebanon wants to participate in the UAE IPO. It could be facilitated through interactions between the exchanges to generate revenue for those exchanges. Each one of the local exchanges have to play well together with their partners, participating partners, the banks and brokers and what have you. This is a connectivity model showing this center running at each one of the exchanges here in the UAE. Same thing could happen with your exchange, connecting in real time to all of the banks. And this is the best slide I've ever made in my life. I really love it. It's my baby right now. In the red block, you are shown all of the functionality and e-services that can be provided by an exchange to all of its potential customers for corporate actions, for IPOs, Sukuk's rights issues, shareholder information website for voting and AGM, virtual deal room for all legal documentation in real time with real-time monitoring from the Capital Market Authority. Exchange charges for all these services. Cross-border exchange IPO includes these exchanges, and the Capital Market Authorities have oversight. Okay, that's more slides. Right now, who's ready? Qatar is ready, but we got to get rid of that lead receiving model. Move it into the exchange, okay? Same thing with Oman. Move it into MCD. Let MCD take over the processes, assure the data format standards and what have you. We have UAE. Is really ready right now, but there is no cross-border business rules and regulations installed at DFM or ADX. Yes, the Emaar IPO, and right now as we speak, the Dubai Parks IPO is being managed electronically. All the processes are automated. And Saudi is probably ready right now, okay? But it needs the business rules and regulations in order to be able to speak to the other exchanges. So you end up with the best slide I ever made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecil. We've got some minutes left for the questions. Is there any question from the floor?
Hi, good morning to all of you. Earlier this morning, someone spoke about financial inclusion. And what I see is that with all this innovation taking place in financial markets, we'll get to a point where this cost has to be transferred to the end consumer. Now, when financial services and products become costly, not every layman or person, member of the public, would be able to participate in our financial markets. So how then can you achieve financial inclusion?
We take some other questions. There are some other questions before trying to give answers.
I kind of agree with Sandeep with regard to, the importance of the payment system. But Mr. Hafid Obrik, when he's talking about AMF offered on payment system, I think it is an issue with regard to the convertibility of the currencies of these countries. We're still doing our payment system, and the settlement through New York, So I don't know how much value added is going to be as long as these currency are not being accepted by their counterparts. So I just want his comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Sandeep or to try and answer.
Yeah, so I think point well said. I do see that as an issue at this point in time, but I do not see this as a showstopper, to be honest. Because if you look at some of the developments that took place in the Western world, for example, Europe, before the unification of this euro as a currency, I think these were the similar issues which were being faced. And here, let's be practical about few things. If I look at GCC as a set, for instance, now what I find is that out of the 6 countries, with the exception of Kuwaiti dinar, rest of the currencies are pegged to dollar. So I think from a mechanism perspective, this should be an easier problem to handle than what it was in many other countries, actually.
Thank you, Sandeep. Hafid?
Yeah, if you allow me. Effectively, this is a key point that has been raised by our colleagues from Oman. The aim of the regional payment system is to do a regional settlement. We are still at the stage of a project. It's not a system that has been fully designed yet. This is a first idea presented to the governors of the Arab central banks in the region to just approve the concept. The concept is accepted. In terms of idea, there is a business case, and we are not just now proceeding with the next steps. Your question is very crucial, and it has been debated a lot on how are we going to do the settlement. Effectively, all the transactions are being settled in New York in US dollar. Some of them are, for example, the Maghreb, they are using euro, and it's being settled in Europe. The objective is to do a regional settlement locally. Whether are we going to use the dollar regionally, the euro, and the UAE dirham, one of them, or the Saudi riyal. Why I'm mentioning these 4? Because based on the figures we have from SWIFT, for 2013, the first currency used cross-border is the US dollar, followed by the UAE dirham, followed by the Saudi riyal, followed by the euro. This is the ranking. So the issue is to have a payment system that will settle this transaction in these 4. We will be flexible. We will have the 4. Now, are we going to start with euro, with dollar, with any local currency? This is a decision that needs to be taken by the decision makers. However, the system will be designed to support the 4 currencies. Of course, you will agree with me that for the 2, which are the foreign currency, dollar and euro, we need absolutely to coordinate with the Fed and with the ECB, because this is a sort of settlement mechanism being done outside the US and outside Europe. It has definitely to be approved or blessed, some blessing from let's say these two institutions. And we are working on that. Are we going to unify, to have one Arab currency? This is the way I see it, and given, let's say, what is happening in the region, I think it's too far as an objective. But however, if the system goes, let's say, in real, this will be another, let's say, step towards reaching that one day. But it's not, let's say, one of the ultimate objective, let's say, of the system as of now. If you allow me, Mr. Chairman, just on the financial inclusion, because we are, one more time, the IMF chairman mentioned that yesterday, that there is a regional task force on financial inclusion. It's a very fresh task force that has been created last year, end of last year. They meet almost 3 times this year. The objective is to effectively try to look, to dig more deeper, let's say, on the practices in terms of customer protection, is one of them. Second is financial literacy, financial education, as well as, other aspects related, how we can easily put the enabling framework for people to get access to financial services. You are right, there is a responsibility on the authority who is in charge of that to protect the customers. But you will also agree with me that if we have electronic based systems, this will definitely reduce the cost somehow. Maybe as an investment at the beginning, the cost will be high, yes. But at the end, if you do that, let's say on, for example, a break-even of 5-6 years, this will definitely, let's say, reduce the cost of using those platforms. And this cost will impact definitely the fees that are being paid by the customers at the end of the day. Using very traditional mechanisms or systems, paper-based maybe, this has a cost, and the cost is definitely impacted. And who is paying for that? The customers themselves. Now, if we switch to another type of thinking and we redevelop and redesign, let's say, the system to be electronic-based and to, let's say, allow an easy access to financial services, this definitely will reduce the cost, and this will be impacted definitely on the fees being paid by the customers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to the panelists. And we have to end of this session. Thanks a lot.